Hi, everybody. Happy Pride. Today we're going to talk about celebrating Pride and being an ally. And what does this even mean? Before we kick off, there's a Menti code at the bottom of the screen. We like doing surveys. We really do. So this, if anybody has not used Menti before, if you go to your mobile and tap in menti.com, that's MENTI _COM. And you'll be given a prompt for a code. The code is 6499017. That's 6499017. So I'll give you a moment to pop on in. And as we go through the slides, there'll be a couple of questions. These are completely 100% anonymized, and just to distort the figures further, in case any of you know each other and are trying to guess who's answered what, Dermot and I will probably answer the questions too. And you can probably guess what our answers are to most of them, but to avoid you guessing, just to keep a little bit of suspense. So we have the first question there before we even start. Do you know anybody who's LGBT? And the reason we ask that is just to see how relevant this talk is, how much knowledge is already in the room. While we do have our slides, we can kind of tweak what we're saying accordingly. So I'll give that a moment. That's menti.com. I'm actually going to pop it into the chat, but if anybody joins late, they won't be able to see the chat, but just for those of you who are here. So it's menti.com and the code is 6499017. So I'll probably repeat that a couple of times throughout, just for anybody who might be joining late. So Dermot, if you want to move on there. So Dermot and I are Under the Rainbow. We're two of the founders and two of the directors of Under the Rainbow. And Under the Rainbow is basically, we're a social enterprise that has a non-oppressive practice. We run a therapy centre that is all-inclusive, that works online and in Cable Street, Dublin City Centre. And we also are an inclusion trainer, as well as corporate wellbeing and mental health. So Dermot, I invite you to just say hello and introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. Yes, thanks, Gillian. Great, speak English, delighted to be here again because we did loads of workshops during the week about Pride, so we're really into the mood now. We want to share our knowledge about what Pride means to us and to be a good ally. Well, my name is Dermot. I'm an openly proud gay, recently diagnosed autistic man, so I'm an openly proud gay autistic man. I used to be an accountant over 20 years. Life threw me a curveball. Fortunately, I couldn't get a job within a year, so I had to reach out for help. And I went to a therapist, and lo and behold, asked her how did she become a therapist. She gave me she gave me details, followed her detail. Here I am. Met Gillian a few years ago. God almighty, it's flying. And my accountancy and my therapy have come together, and I'm part of this. I'm the CFO of Under the Rainbow, as well as a qualified psychotherapist. So.
Thanks, Dermot. I love working with Dermot, and Gillian is my name. I'm the CEO of Under the Rainbow, and when I was growing up in the 80s and in the 90s, yes, I'm that old, I often had this thought that I was an alien in human skin, that there was something kind of wrong or broken with me. And then when I was a teenager, quite a young teenager, I fancied lots of people, including girls and women. And I remember talking to an auntie about this, and she said, "Oh, no, don't tell your parents whatever you do." So I repressed any sort of sexual expression and sexual identity and orientation for a very long time, and ended up in a relationship that wasn't right for me, because it's terrible to say, but looking back in my life, I grabbed onto the nearest man to try and look normal and date and just get on with life and not cause any trouble. And the more and more I began to realize I was not what we call straight, heterosexual, the more I hid it, because I thought, well, what if I want a family someday and this isn't a thing that could happen? And in the 90s, I remember when homosexuality was decriminalized. So I grew up in an era where it was still seen as a crime, and that got internalized. And Dermot's going to talk a little bit about that in a bit. But this idea of your sexual orientation, I questioned for a long time, and I only came out publicly to family and work in my 30s. Even though I'd been dating women, non-binary people and trans people, as well as men, pretty much all through my life. So I'm pansexual, which means I like who I like. Their gender doesn't really have a huge impact in who I fancy or I'm attracted to. It doesn't make a difference in how I decide who to date. So basic LGBT terminology. We have another Menti code there. I have 100% of you know somebody who's LGBT. And I guess in Ireland, we're kind of seen as one of the quote unquote gay capitals of the world. Actually, statistically, honestly, we're 15th, not number one. But it's still a pretty high number. We're the 15th gay inclusive city in Europe. So I guess we're doing okay. Still have a bit of a way to go. So these questions are anonymized. Menti code there, menti.com. And the code, again, it's 6499017. Whenever you see the code on the screen, that's a prompt to go to your phones. Do you personally identify as LGBT? This is anonymized, but everybody who has what's considered a minority identity, and in this we're talking about sexual minority, we know what it's like to sort of not be the same as or fit into mainstream society. And I'm surprised everybody, probably most of all myself, by marrying a man who's also probably not anywhere near as straight as society would like people to be. So when we're talking about people who are not LGBT, the term, and you may have heard it, cis het is the term that's now coming in. And by het, we mean heterosexual. And by cis, we mean that your gender and your birth sex are in alignment. You came out of the womb, doctor said, it's a boy, it's a girl, and that's been who you are. There's never been any variance, or you've not really felt non-conforming with that. So cis, that's all that means. So you're born whatever gender, you are whatever gender. LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans. And these might seem like obvious things, but the reason we put the acronym here is there's always a lot of controversy in every event we go to. Oh, do you call it LGBT, LGBTQ, LGBTI, LGBTQIA? And I have, in a corporate world, often had people call it alphabet soup. So we use the acronym quite interchangeably. For us, your sexual and gender identity matters, and the whole idea of it being a spectrum, on a personal level, I'm also neurodivergent. I have a little bit of an issue with the word spectrum. I don't like the phrase on the spectrum, but when we're talking about gender and sexuality, we are talking about a spectrum. And if you think of it in a range, and this is why I have the color profile here, I'm looking at painting the sitting room. I'm sick of looking at color spectrums. I really am, from gray to green and every shade in between. But gender and sexuality are a little bit like that. You can vary in terms of the shade of gender, the shade of sexuality that you have. And I guess that's why we're calling it a spectrum. And it's just, you can slide up and down this spectrum. It doesn't mean that this is a fixed point in time for the rest of your life. So Q, queer and questioning, both are valid. And I know some people have, again, the word queer can be controversial. People have raised it. Is it okay to say queer? Is it not okay to say queer? And it seems to very much depend on your age as well. I would call myself queer. For me, being queer is a little bit different from my sexual orientation because I have other, I guess, relationship non-conforming aspects. Historically, I have been in a consensual non-monogamous relationship, and that would be seen as a queer identity. So I would be queer as well as pansexual. And questioning, gosh, as I've explained, I've probably done that for 30 years. Intersex. Intersex is, people don't really understand intersex, and it's not something we talk about enough. And I think it needs to really be brought to the agenda more, and that's why we do include it. Intersex is a gender variance, but from a medical perspective. So when somebody is born and the doctor takes the baby out of the womb, that the genitals or the chromosomes aren't quite in alignment with this binary boy-girl sort of way that we're born. And by binary, I mean just that, two things, two genders. There are men, there are women. At Under the Rainbow, we believe that gender is a spectrum. So for intersex people, they can be trans, they can be LGBT, they can have gender variance, but sometimes they can also just identify with the gender they were declared at birth. And I know there's a lot of work being done on this whole field for, I guess, medical changes to happen where it isn't a case that this binary declaration has to be made and this person's fate and future and gender is decided for them going forward. People might say, oh, well, there's hardly any intersex people in the world, it doesn't really matter. Scientifically, according to medical information, you're talking about 1.5 to 2% of the population, which is huge, absolutely huge. So it's just food for thought. And then the plus, and we always say plus includes many, many, many more. We can have a discussion around terminology if anybody wants to ask any questions on the further terms. But to move on with our talk, and just we'll share the Menti slides with you in a bit. Almost half of the people in attendance identify as LGBT. So hello, fellow community members. Dermot, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Gillian. I looked at a bit of history in my youth. I sound like my own age when I'm saying that. I'm in my 40s. I still feel 21. But years ago, I loved history. So where did it all start? Where did all these rights start for us? Well, this is Stonewall. Grotty place, if I'm honest, in New York still, but it's so immensely, the history in it is just incredible. The last time I was there, I said, this is where it all began with a friend of mine. You could sense it. It really made me proud. But back then in the 60s, really, it was very difficult to member of the queer community, really concentrating mafia. Gay bars were safe havens for people out there in New York. But one day people had enough in 1969. This is Marsha P. Johnson, and thank you to Marsha P. Johnson for doing this, because I wouldn't be here, or none of us in the queer community would be here. And personally, I'm talking about me again, I wouldn't be here openly saying I'm a proud gay man, because what she did started the ball rolling for all of us for our rights. The police raided in 1969. She said, had enough. She got a glass, fired across the room, and said, I have my civil rights. And that started the riots in Stonewall. So that was the birthplace for the queer movement, the liberation movement for us. And thanks to her, by a simple gesture of going, I had enough, I have my civil rights, it started the protest movement, and it started right around America and went right around the world. We here in Ireland, modern Ireland, this is actually a lovely photograph. We had a photo competition, the first diversity photo competition in Ireland, and it's one of the photographs that was entered. And it's really lovely. It symbolizes what is happening in Ireland at the moment. Ireland has changed immensely. Oh God, I'm proud to be a proud Irish gay man, because in 25 years, we have really changed. My God, we have really changed. And we're so diverse, we're opening, we're accepting, we have pride, it's open to everyone, it's amazing. It's absolutely amazing, it's brilliant. But we'll have a look at the history. Oh, the Menti code, I love getting into
Menti code.
Oh, Menti code, I love the Menti codes, I keep missing them.
Just in general, not necessarily around sexual and gender orientation, the question is, have you ever felt discriminated against? And this, I guess, is specific to in Ireland. Sorry, Dermot, back to you.
No problem, thanks. I do get passionate about this, and I forget about the Menti code a lot. Again, history, here's my passion. This is a little bit of history. We mentioned Stonewall, that's where it all started. What about in Ireland? So in 1982, Declan Flynn was a gay man, and he was murdered in Fairview Park. People in Dublin may know where Fairview Park is. Many people don't realise this when I talk about it. But he was murdered, and the young people that attacked and murdered him got away with his murder. And that outraged the queer community, Irish queer community in Ireland. So we had our first Pride in 1983. I had the honour about a few years ago of meeting Declan Flynn's family, his nephew, and I said to him, we both got very emotional. I said, his death was not in vain, because his death started the rights movement in Ireland. And again, thanks to Marsha and to Declan, I can openly talk, and Gillian as well, and part of the queer community, we can openly be who we are. 1993, show my age, leaving cert, doesn't matter, homosexuality was decriminalised. It was incredible, absolutely incredible. 2010, same-sex civil partnership. 2015, marriage equality. I will never ever forget this. We were the first country to vote, and it was incredible, incredible feeling. I remember I was studying to be a therapist at the time. The group didn't quite get how it means to me, and I just left the group for lunchtime to hear the news, and I never forget it when the yes came in, and I broke down in tears, because I said, finally, my country has accepted me. Criminalization, like great gender dysphoria, has no longer medical classified as mental disorder as well. Great for the trans community, wonderful. Gender Recognition Act here in Ireland, 2015. First Trans Pride 2018, 2019 same-sex marriage in Northern Ireland. Fantastic statistics. We really have moved on. It's incredible. Again, I'm so proud when I read these out. It's really, really incredible how far we've come, both north and south of the border. Sadly, it's not all bed of roses. Yes, there's flags flying high. Even I live near Ballyfermot, and there was a rainbow flag. I had to take it down, but anyway, there was a rainbow flag flying high in Roman Catholic Church. It was incredible. I couldn't believe it myself. Double take. But look at these statistics. Have a look at these statistics. The first one was in 2016, wonderful organisation, LGBT Ireland. This survey was done to compare the mental health of our young people in our community to the general population. They have 2 times the level of self-harm because of their identity and gender expression. They're 3 times the level of attempted suicide, 4 times the level of severe anxiety. See this in my practice, so does Gillian. I particularly remember a young trans client coming into me with arms on her, really marks on her arms. She was struggling really that day. I've seen it. We're also looking at our elder population in the queer community because they, if you remember, they were growing up in a different time. Now they're growing old, they're getting older. Look at that, 35% still feel they were rejected by their peers if they told their friends. These are 55 to 80-year-olds. 27% are afraid of harassment. And this is really shocking. Healthcare providers, they don't want to come out. Shocking statistics, absolutely shocking. Again, not to question more recent, belong to a wonderful organisation that looks after our young people. More recently, they did a survey. 93% of our young people are suffering because of anxiety and stress, depression, because of COVID. Thank God we're all coming out of it. But because of their identity, because they relied on the clubs and societies to help them. And me too, and I'll talk about minority stress, about my experience. But they relied on it because it was a safe haven for them to go to. Because sadly, they're still getting abuse because their identity have been degraded in schools and friends, because their identity being gay, bi. Oh God, I remember when I was in Mayo Pride, somebody told me about they had to leave secondary school because people degraded them because they were bi. I couldn't believe this. But still, those statistics are shocking. They're modern, 2020, only recently. So there's still a lot of people struggling out there because of their identity. Minority stress. That is what members of our community suffer from. Minority stress. Basically, society sees that heteronormativity as the dominant. That is, if you're heterosexual and you're cis, as Gillian's mentioned, explains this to you all, that as dominant, and that is dominant in society. You should be that way. That's the top. So you can imagine all the people, including myself, years ago when I was a 14-year-old kid, trying to fit into that damn box of being a male. It was really, really difficult. It caused me so much stress. And honestly, when I went to a club, a queer club, a running club, my minority stress was cleared because it helped me. That's why people need clubs and societies to support them. Clubs and society, queer clubs and society support them in their identity. But there are the struggles that people are dealing with minority stress. The questions, identity questions, the mental health struggles, trying to fit into boxes, the stereotypes people grow up with. My God, every time I came out of the game, man, the stereotypes, unbelievable. The mocking I was put down because of the way I talked or act, thinking it's a joke, it's funny. We talked about banter, Gillian mentioned that. Oh, it's hilarious. Paper cuts, they're like, tick, tick, tick. They go at your psyche identity, all this slagging, oh, I'm only messing with you. No, intersectionality, many people, I work with people from the queer community who identify in Black community. So they have to deal with being queer and also dealing with being Black. You know, so it's amazing what the resilience these people have. But there is, and it's sadly, there's so much isolation still out there. Don't want to read, we're going to read up about allyship and all that, and what you, if you're not a member of this community, how you can support people who are feeling isolated, particularly in rural Ireland. I come from a rural background. Yeah, I come from County Dublin, but I grew up in a real rural background. And my God, I was so isolated, didn't know where I was going to go. You know, I had no idea. There was nobody I knew I could turn to until, thank God, my friend came out when he was 18. He came out to me when he was 6. Well, I told him I might be gay when I was 16. He said, oh, no, you're not, your brand's face. Well, he told me when he was actually 20. And luckily I had him on my journey to accept. So there is a lot of minority stress still within our community, both young and old, because of our identity, because of our gender expression. There still is. Yes, pride is wonderful. God, I still get excited about it. But as you can see, there's still a lot of work to be done. Gillian.
So we had a Menti code there that just asked about your own. It's okay. We have a lot of participants have taken place already or taken part. Your own mental health struggles, and I'm going to share the results from the Menti so we don't just ask these questions just for our own data research. The highest rating, and this is fairly consistent with any of the talks we do, anxiety and stress. So for anybody who has, well, we all have mental health, right? Everybody has mental health. This idea that mental health is a stigma or is an issue, your mental health exists in the same way your physical health exists, whether it's healthy or in poor health. That is the part that varies, but everybody has mental health. At various points in our life, we will have mental health issues. Everybody will. But consistently, we see stress coming in as one of the strong points of things people are struggling with. And anxiety almost consistently always follows as a close second. And it's the same here. And I'll share these slides with you in a moment. If you can think of those stats that Dermot quoted 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, like, we are still not doing enough, hence the allyship. And this is, yes, Pride is absolutely a celebration. Why Pride? Because it's fun, because it's a celebration, because it's a way for us to get together and have a day out, right? But it's a lot more than just that. As Dermot spoke about the origins of Pride, Pride was initially a social movement. And a social movement is where a group of people get together who have experienced oppression and have experienced not being included and obstacles by the main culture. And because of these people getting together, challenging the mainstream of culture and society for social rights and inclusion. So Pride is actually a social movement. It's a human rights movement looking for equality. So it's called a protest, and it still is, because we'll talk a little bit in a way of how many countries still don't have same-sex marriage legalized, how many countries still don't have like LGBT legalized. There's still a long way to go. So why Pride? And I remember the last corporate I worked in, it's a while ago, I came out in that job. But I remember being at the coffee station, and it was one of the things that made me decide, why am I even pretending to be somebody I'm not? Because at the coffee station, some old dear who was working there was on a big rant about a pride flag that was in the lobby and said, why do they need pride? Well, she came in the next morning and my desk was decked out completely with flags, and I was wearing the colours, and I wore a flag as a cape around the office that day. And that was how I came out, and everybody was quite shocked. But that was my way of communicating. So why Pride? Because it teaches tolerance, it teaches acceptance, and really and truly it teaches inclusion. And we can see that now with Pride becoming more and more family friendly. It's being normalized for children. My nieces and my nephew have been in Pride and had a great day out waving flags, still not quite grasping exactly what. Well, they were quite young when we brought them in. It was 2015. But the whole idea of just this normalized concept to educate in Pride history and talk about the social movements, the equality movements in society. Nearly every time that a change is made, it's made by the people who are looking for that access to human rights, that are looking for inclusion, that are fighting for their space at the table. So how far have LGBT rights come? Pride shows how far they've come. It also shows how far they've not come. And it highlights, as I said, with Ireland being 15 out of 49 countries in Europe, it highlights the work that still has to be done. We celebrate social and self-acceptance. I remember when I went to Pride as an ally, even though I was there in my heart as a member of the community. And I was there with a girlfriend at the time, but I was 19 and it was the 90s, but I refused to have any public displays of affection because of what if someone who knew my parents saw me. But my God, that broke my heart. But yet being there, being a part of something, it gave me that courage that, yeah, this is part of who I am. There's a whole community for me when I'm ready. That self-acceptance piece. People coming together in friendship, love and support. And we can see that. Oh gosh, all you have to do is look at social media in June and it's Rainbow City. Problem is we've 11 grey months then of the year, and to be a real ally, we need to have this consistently, not just a Pride month, but LGBT inclusion happens 12 months of the year, not just for Pride. Being gay is for life, not just for Pride, right? To recognise the positive impact of LGBT people. And you can see it. You go into Pride, you go into the city centre, wherever you are in a Pride, you will see the emotions, you will see the connection, you will see strangers making eye contact and smiling, you will see tears welling up in people's eyes. It is a very moving day. It is a very moving experience. And it really does connect in your heart of being proud of who you are. Even if you're not quite ready to admit it to yourself or admit it to others, you feel it and you carry that in your heart and you carry that pride. And I just think it's so aptly named. And it's an event for everybody, from family-friendly face painting right through, and it's the controversy every year. Should Pride be for the likes of the BDSMers or the leather daddies or the Kingsters or the gimp masks? And it's a discussion every single year. But it is an event for absolutely everybody. And granted, there might be an over 18 section or a watershed event then later on in the evening. But I love how inclusive it is for family and for friends. Dermot, if you move on to the next slide. So global LGBT. These stats have changed in the last year, slowly, but they are changing. Same-sex activity is still criminalized in 70 countries. 70 countries. So this causes a lot of concern for our trans friends and families around passports and identity and having access and being able to travel into certain countries. It's still an issue. Public displays of affection with your spouse might still be an issue in several countries. Only 21 countries allow transgender people to serve in the armed forces. That was 19 last year. So it's on the increase. But seriously, only 21? You see, we still have work to do. And only 29 countries have legalized same-sex marriage. Isn't it amazing that Ireland could say, yes, we were one of the first? But that's only 6 years ago. And there's still some people who are a little bit, well, now they have same-sex marriage. They have their equal rights. What more do they want? Looking at those mental health stats, I'm sorry, we still have work to do. So being your true self, I have another Menti code there. Let me just switch over the question. I find this question very interesting. The question on Menti is, how much do you feel you can be your true self? And there are 3 categories: work, family, and society. Genuinely, while we kind of look at the whole ethos of inclusion at work, I'm very, as a hobby, I'm interested in psychological culture and workplace, psychological safety, workplace belonging, all of these aspects. I just, as a hobby, I study this stuff. But when you have inclusion, whether it's LGBT or any other minority group, people feel a lot more welcome, accepted, and that they can be their true selves. And when you can be your true self, you can bring your whole self into wherever it is, whether it's work, whether it's community, and because it's welcomed. It's not frowned upon. It's not, what are you doing wearing a Pride t-shirt in here today? Love is love. Oh, would you ever stop? As Dermot said, microaggressions, those paper cuts. And research shows that when you are being your true self, when you can come out, when you can live with authenticity, and I know that buzzword has been overused, but I'm talking about without being in fear for your life, you have acceptance, you have more confidence, you have higher self-esteem. We see it in the therapy room in people's mental healths. You're more validated, you belong. And in exchange, you will work harder, you will be more committed, you will be more loyal, you will diversify your own networks. You'll make friends with people who have completely different walks of life to you. That gives you such an amazing way of seeing the world and such a rich cultural context. From a own personal perspective, the more you diversify the people you hang out with, the more richer your life experience is, because you learn things you never would have even thought possible. You'll taste foods you never imagined, or you'll go to bars, maybe decked out in glitter, that you never would have seen yourself in, and you can do all of this as an ally. So diverse company, and even somewhere like Iconic, where you might be all entrepreneurs sharing a workspace, you've got much more people to have access to in terms of having conversations, diversifying the talent, the pool of skills that people bring to the table, the backgrounds, the ideas, this whole ethos of what diversity and inclusion is. The word diversity just means different. It's the inclusion piece that really matters. So we can have more innovation, better competitive advantage, better networks. Like it's win-win. It's sort of a no-brainer. And it's as simple as this. It starts with hello. That's it. Inclusion starts with hello. So how to be an ally? You can be an ally in work, at home, in your heart. It's one of the biggest things I'd say about being an ally is watch your banter. I'm only slagging. And I have a brother in his 20s. I'm not going to say much more about him, but he's recently caught himself, probably from years of me nagging him. One of the biggest things he used to say is, "That's so gay, that's gay, that's gay." He has caught himself. I last heard him say at my brother's wedding last October, and as he was saying it, he caught it. And that's the thing. It's about catching your language, watching your banter. Do you just on autopilot, because you're nearly brainwashed by society or the things you've watched, to come out with these sort of derogatory comments without even stopping to think what you're saying and where they come from? So please mind your banter. And you don't have to be LGBT to be involved in events. It's about acceptance. It's about inclusion for everybody. Using gender neutral language. What is it about being a woman, right? I'm in my 40s now, going into work and people making all these assumptions. For a while, I was dating another woman. And when I went into the office, people were saying, "Tick tock, tick tock, you're getting on there. When's the baby's going to happen?" How dare they? But you've no idea how common that is. Or I'd go in on a Monday, "Any fellas?" So I would just shut down the conversation straight away. No, no fellas, but I had a lot of fun with a trans person. Like, you couldn't really say that. So even this assumption that everybody's straight and everybody's cis and everybody's going to follow the mainstream of society and be mass producing babies in their 20s or whatever, the whole thing around your language, being more gender neutral. And that is not taking away from someone's identity. That isn't gender erasure. That's just being more inclusive. If you really need to be a nosy Parker and ask about somebody's dating life, and I'd really advise you not to, you could just say any dates, any meetings, any people, any hookups, whatever the language is, the more gender neutral, the more acceptance. And it shows allyship as well. Showing support with flags. I like the idea of having a flag all year. For some reason, I'm blocking out Pride Month. That's what the June is doing to me. I was going to say 11 months of the year. We have pins on our Under the Rainbow pin has a flag on it. We have pins that we'd sport all year round anyway. This idea of having your allyship shown in June, it is great, and it does show that support, and it shows the companies that are LGBT inclusive. It's not enough. You can just have a little flag on your desk year round. You can have a lanyard with rainbow colors. You can have a pin on your rucksack or on the lapel of your coat. There are little tiny ways that you can show support. And all it is saying, "I'm LGBT aware and inclusive." And it's as simple as that. So people might say, "Oh, commercialism, capitalism, flags, this, that, and the other." Yeah, to a point, but it's also a symbol, and it's a powerful symbol and one that's recognized universally. Educate yourself. Thank you so much, all of you, for attending this talk. I hope you get something out of it. There are a lot of events going on for June during Pride, and there are a lot of events outside of June that still have to do with LGBT inclusion. Diversifying your media, diversifying your networks, educating yourself, having conversations with people who are not like you, breaking through that what's called affinity bias. This sort of, "Oh, I get on better with people who have more in common with me." Yeah, of course you do. But you're not really going to learn much that way. So diversify your networks. Accept a changing Ireland. By God, it's changing. 70% of you have felt discriminated against at some point. Ireland is changing. Wherever there's change, there's resistance. That's science. That's actually how our brains work. We don't really like change. And even if we do and we embrace change, our brains are going to resist it a little bit. But it is changing with the increase in the internet and, well, pre-COVID, the much more accessible travel. We are getting much more diverse cultures. It's amazing. Ireland's changing. The world is changing. And I don't see that as a bad thing, but it can be challenging for some people who like traditional views. Embrace diversity. It's not going away. The future is diverse, full stop. Diversity is here to stay. And I think the more diverse of where you become, the more you're going to future-proof your entrepreneurship and your business. Consider intersectional discrimination. And I'm going to use the phrase minority. As a woman who is a minority, one, I'm a female CEO. Statistically, I'm a minority based on that alone. Two, I'm disabled. Three, I'm neurodiverse. Four, I'm LGBT. That's an intersectional diversity. And yet I have the privilege of being educated, being employed, being white. If you have intersectional discrimination, you have oppression by society on many levels. It's not just one identity, it's multiple, and that has a huge impact on your mental health. Absolutely. Because when you might get finally accepted into one circle, what about all these other things you might have to hide? And it's just something to be aware of when you're being an ally, when you're being inclusive. You don't really know what somebody's story is. We all have a story, every one of us, irrespective of your identity. And yet we're so quick to judge others. And reach out to support groups for information. Community is an incredible place to heal. It's a very, very powerful thing to connect with community. Sometimes we have an internalized stigma around, oh, well, I'm not like them. But just to catch that, that's a bias. By actually forming an allyship with a community or with people like you or people with similar values, you get that validation and sense of belonging I spoke of earlier. Dermot? Now, dramatic statement here. Acceptance of people's true selves can literally save lives. I cannot stress how important and true that is. And I know it sounds like a big drama statement. It is true. We've seen it as therapists. Dermot and I are therapists as well as workplace trainers. We've seen it. Acceptance can save a life. Even if you don't understand, even if you don't agree with it, even if you're confused and still trying to figure it out in your head, that's okay. It's the acceptance piece. And I often have people say to me, I don't really know what to say. I'm not quite sure about the language, so I don't really say anything because I'm afraid of getting it wrong. Most people who are not LGBT say that. Not all, most. The danger with that is erasure. That's completely invalidating somebody's experience. And if you're not deliberately trying to include, you're automatically risking non-inclusion. So by actually saying to somebody, I'm not sure about the language, or please forgive me while I'm getting this wrong, or I'm trying my best to educate myself, but I really want to be inclusive and respectful. That's much better. And then getting it wrong and apologizing and move on, that's much better than not saying anything because I'm afraid of getting it wrong. Because I hate to say this, it isn't about you. It's about society. And sometimes that means getting outside your comfort zone and taking a risk. So acceptance can save lives. There's a Menti code there, and I think that's the last question. Let me just, yep. It's an open-worded question. We're going to share the Menti results with you now as we come to the end. And this is, what can you do to be an ally? We've shared our contact details there. We're Under the Rainbow. We are Ireland's first awarded diversity agent. We've been accredited with the All Stars Business Award because of the work we do. So we're very, very proud of that. We've Therapy Centre in Capel Street, we're inclusion trainers, and we also do at least one, it tends to be more an average of 3 free community events a month. So if you follow us on social media, you can stay tuned for the events we're doing. And actually, we are also working with Iconic in August, which some of you might be interested in, not LGBT specific, but we're talking about how the diversity toolkit for entrepreneurs and small businesses. So if you're interested in having a more inclusive business, even as an entrepreneur, you can join in on that. Keep an eye on the Iconic website for the details. Now, Dermot, I'm going to take over sharing the screens and I'm going to share the Menti. Here we go. Can you see that?
Not yet. Oh, here it is. It's coming up.
Have you got, what can you do to be an ally?
Yeah, we have that. Yes.
Great stuff. Now I'm going to go through the Menti results backwards, just while the word cloud is coming in here. What can you do to be an ally? The more that something is said the same, the bigger the text is. That's how this works. But there are some really amazing suggestions coming in here. Include, educate, accept, listen, support, compassion. Amazing. Just say hello. Yep. Embrace diversity. I'm trying. I love that. That's it. It's about trying, learning from your mistakes. Be aware of words, show flags. There's some brilliant ideas here. Absolutely brilliant ideas. I'm going to leave this up just for a second because I know this is being recorded so that we can capture this then on the playback. We got that? Great. Now, let's have a look at the other Menti results. How much do you feel you can be your true self? With family, that's brilliant. In society and in work. So we still have a bit of room for improvement there. I've never done this where everybody has gotten over 4. Anytime I've asked this survey. So we still have a bit of a way to go. And I would just leave you the question on a personal level, why is that for you? What mental health issues do you struggle with? Yeah, stress and anxiety in here. So with these statistics, can you imagine then if we're talking 2 times, 3 times, and 4 times with the LGBT community, the impact that the mental health issues are having? And that is generally because of the discrimination, minority stress, and being not included. Have you ever felt discriminated against? Those numbers are very telling. And another question, and I haven't asked it, and this is, have you ever been the one doing the discriminating? Do you identify as LGBT? Thank you very much for those of you who have joined and are interested in being an ally. Do you know anybody who is LGBT? We all do. Good stuff. And that's the Menti Cook. That's all of our slides for Menti. Any questions, we'll be happy to hang around and answer for a few minutes. We're aware we've come to the end of the time, so thank you very much.